This episode brought to you by Cafe Imports, Minneapolis-based importers of fine specialty green coffees. Independently owned and operated since 1993, Cafe Imports has been dedicated to decreasing its impact on the earth through renewable energy, carbon neutrality, and by supporting conservational efforts in places where quality coffee is grown and also where quality coffee is consumed. Where does your coffee come from?
And by the National Parks of Lake Superior Foundation. As a nonprofit, we rely on support from listeners like you. If you like what you hear, please consider a donation. To learn more and make a gift, visit us at www.gosuperior.org.
Welcome to the Lake Superior Podcast. I'm Walt Lindala.
And I'm Frida. We are made stronger by story, and there's no better source than the continent's largest body of fresh water, Lake Superior.
So join us as we highlight the 5 national parks that ring this greatest of the Great Lakes, meet the people, tour the places, and learn about the projects that make these parks and body of water so remarkable.
This podcast made possible with the support of the National Parks of Lake Superior Foundation and Media Brew Communications.
I'm Walt Lindala.
And I'm Frida.
Well, welcome once again to another episode of the Lake Superior Podcast.
Oh, Walt, you know, I love Isle Royale, and I have never been there in the winter. Oh my gosh, I want to go so bad. Oh man, if you could just put me on that plane. And, you know, last winter we weren't able to have winter study because there was no ice sheet for the planes to land. And of course the boats couldn't get in there either. And well, this year things have changed.
Yes.
Winter has come through. And I didn't get to go, but I am so glad that our good friend Johnathan Pauli got to go, and we're going to get a chance to talk with him.
He is a professor at the Department of Forest and Wildlife Ecology at the University of Wisconsin Madison. He joins us here on the podcast, actually, once again. Johnathan, hello, welcome.
Hi, Walt. Hi, Frida. How are you guys doing?
We're doing pretty good. We wanted to talk about the winter study, Isle Royale National Park and all of that. But before we get into that, for those that are joining us maybe that aren't familiar with it, when we hear the term winter study, what is that?
Yeah, so winter study has been going on for a long, long time, for 60-plus years now, well before I was walking around Isle Royale.
Mm-hmm.
And it was started as an opportunity to monitor the moose and wolf populations on Isle Royale. And it's continued ever since, except for, as Frida was saying earlier, except for last year, the season was severely truncated for any of the survey work. And it's continued ever since. And it's really an opportunity for us to understand how the organisms on Isle Royale not only make it through in the summer months, but also in the winter months.
But why is it so important? Why does all this research really matter?
Yeah, so there are multiple programs that are going on in Isle Royale in the winter. And those programs are designed around surveying wolf populations and moose populations, as well as surveying and studying foxes and martens and snowshoe hares. And I think generally speaking, winter is a really important season for many of these organisms. And so understanding just part of the picture, just understanding what populations are doing or how individuals are surviving in the summer months, in the growing season, really limits our understanding of what the community is doing or what these species are doing. So in general, then, I would say that winter is actually maybe, if I could argue it, the more critical of the seasons.
Mm-hmm.
It's a period of nutritional and resource deficits. It's a period where organisms are under energetic and nutritional stress. And it's a really important time, then, to study these winter-adapted organisms during the winter season.
Now, of course, we mentioned that it didn't happen last year because of the weather issues and such, but you did go this year. Let's talk about it. How was it?
It was great. It was fantastic. I brought a team from UW, 2 of my graduate students, and I went up there with Park Service personnel, and we spent a few weeks surveying for mesocarnivores, as well as doing some continued snowshoe hare work. Our projects, our winter study, really focuses on how foxes and martens, two of the smaller-bodied carnivores, make a living, what their populations are like, how they interact with one another, and importantly, their prey species like snowshoe hares. So it was a wonderful field season. It was really fun, a great group of people, and super productive.
I remember learning about martens from you, Johnathan, and I am kind of surprised. I mean, Lord only knows there's a lot of fox on Isle Royale because they warn you when you get off the Ranger that, pull your boots inside your tent because I guess in the winter they find all these fox dens with all these mismatched boots. So, but I'm surprised knowing the trees at Isle Royale, they're kind of scrubby. And martens love it there. I mean, are they prolific?
Yeah. And, Frida, you're right. Last time I was on a couple of years ago, we spent a lot of time talking about martens, and you and Walt will be surprised to hear that I am more than happy to talk about martens right now. Your observation is good, Frida. It's a solid observation, which is Isle Royale really does feature forests that we don't typically associate as primary marten habitat. The trees are big, which is good, but there's also not a lot of lower complexity to the forest, and that owes itself to a lot of the browsing that moose populations have done over the years, where they clear out that lower vegetation from the forest. So the forests then on Isle Royale feel much more like kind of a gallery forest than if you go to certain islands on, say, for example, where I also work, the Apostle Islands, where we don't have a large ungulate on those islands at high densities. And so that lower forest floor and that kind of mid-canopy is really thick with a lot of vegetative complexity. Martens love vegetative complexity. And that piece is much more rare on Isle Royale. And so it is an interesting place to study martens because they are utilizing habitat types that are somewhat different than we typically associate them with in other parts of the Great Lakes region.
So, Johnathan, I'm curious. Now, you said you brought some graduate students with you on your team this year. What's your day like when you're there? I mean, first of all, did they kind of sign up and say, we want to go here? Or was it kind of like, you two, you're coming with me? And guess what? But let's talk about it. I mean, how do the students do it? And what's your day like when you're out there?
That's funny, Walt. I like that. So it's more of the former, which is when winter studies do come together. I typically have students that are working on Isle Royale-related projects. And they might actually be utilizing or working directly on the mesocarnivore surveys that we're really targeting. And so those are the students that kind of get first dibs, those that are actively working on their thesis or dissertation on Isle Royale. But if we have openings, if there are other opportunities, we do open it up to people, especially those people that have a lot of skiing experience and a lot of winter.
Yep. Got to have that because you got to be able to get around there. So, let's talk about that. So you start your day. Yeah. Then what? So you wake up.
Yep. You wake up and you say hi to the sun. You get your coffee going and your breakfast. So we stay at Gilbank facility, which is on the Wendigo, the western side of the island. We're delivered to Wendigo, as Frida was saying at the beginning, by a plane that's outfitted, instead of floats, it's outfitted with skis. And those skis then land in Washington Harbor. And at Washington Harbor, it's a short walk then to the Gilbank facility. Gilbank is, a medium-sized cabin that's heated by stove. There is a generator, so while people are in the cabin working, we do have operational electricity, which is great. We filter the water from the lake. But every day then we wake up, we have breakfast, and once the sun is high enough, just a little bit past sunrise, we'll strike out on our trails. Now, for people who are not familiar with the geography of the western end of Isle Royale, Wendigo, that area where the visitor center is and National Park Service housing is, really kind of looks like a hub or acts like a hub in the sense that all these different trails then spoke out from Wendigo. So I jokingly always say that, all roads lead to Rome, all roads lead back to Wendigo. And so we can start in Wendigo, and from that starting point every morning, we'll take a different route. We have these predetermined routes that we've been doing for a number of years now, and we'll ski out a set distance that covers that route. Now, that could be skiing 7 miles out, or it could be skiing 10, 11 miles out, 12 miles out, and then when we get to the end of the route, we ski back. That's a long ways. I always like to joke also with my colleagues and students that, the only complaint I have about this project is every year these routes get longer and longer and longer for me.
And we need to share with our listeners, Johnathan, that we are not talking about a groomed track trail,
exactly.
And you are busting trail,
trail.
Oh my gosh, the drifting, and let's just talk. I mean, well, when you're doing the greenstone, or maybe even, I don't know, Huggins tough for me too, but the Minong Trail, oh man. You are tough.
Yeah.
You are one tough guy.
Well, thank you. I feel like I'm getting less tough the older I get, but it's good to bring graduate students out there with me. But it is, Frida, thanks for saying that. It is breaking trail, and so you're pounding these trails open, which is a ton of work. The nice thing is that they are out and backs. By that I mean we go out, you bust a trail in, and then you ski back. And that return is usually a lot faster because you've broken a trail, which is mighty nice. But we repeat those same surveys over and over and over again. So we'll not just do, the Minong once, we'll have to do the Minong multiple times. Our minimum target is 3 visits to the Minong, 3 visits to all of our surveys. If we can fit more in, wonderful, but 3 is really the target we're hitting. And so it is a little bit heartbreaking after you pound a trail and then you get a snowfall. It buries your trail, and you got to realize you got to break another one. But while we're going down these trails, we are carefully documenting the sign and track of species that we're encountering. And that is to say that animals aren't dumb. They're actually quite smart. And they really will run these trail systems in the summer, but also in the winter, because it's an open space that they can move through. And so as we're going up and down these trails, we are recording what we see. And if we find some kind of biological sample that an animal left, for example, like a scat sample, we'll collect that sample along from the trail. And then those come back to my lab at the University of Wisconsin Madison.
Yeah, I did want to ask you about that real quick. We're talking with Johnathan Pauli here on the podcast today. He's a professor, Department of Forest and Wildlife Ecology, University of Wisconsin Madison, and we're talking about the Isle Royale Winter Survey. How long are you out there? How long are you on the island?
Oh, yeah. So it's different from year to year. Good question. It's different from year to year. It's usually a few weeks is our stay up there. There are a few different projects that are going on as part of winter study. And ours, gets to have that few week chunk that we do the surveys. And then that, because we're limited in space, in terms of housing in the winter, because we have this gillbank facility that can only house so many bodies, then we will kind of trade out. So, we will trade out, and then people will trade in. People from the Park Service or Grand Portage will come in and kind of conduct their component of the winter study research. So our piece is really just a few weeks up there. I forgot to mention before, and what a day looks like. I think the other thing I really want to give credit to my graduate students and I on is that each day is actually quite long. So we'll leave at, just after sunrise. But given all that trail breaking and all that sample collection, we typically don't get back until, 4 or 5 or 5:30. So it's really long days out in the winter conditions, by yourself on these trails. And for me, it's exhausting. It's wonderful. It's difficult, and it's a lot of fun. So there's a lot of complexity of the emotions you have while you're skiing these trails. But they're big days. They're really big days. So when you get back, you're pretty well gassed. And usually that's when I have my glass of whiskey before I have dinner.
Yeah, it warms you up.
Medicinal, just medicinal for sure.
It's a painkiller and it warms you up.
Yeah. Johnathan, I am just imagining this, and many folks understand that pristine, and if they've been to Isle Royale, they can only just envision a blanket of snow, a fresh track, looking for other folks that might be out there for certain. But then I also get a little hair raising on the back of my neck thinking, you, of course, are a visitor to Isle Royale. And have you run into, I don't ever want to run into a moose when I'm on skis.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm also wondering what I might, look like to a wolf. So,
sure thing. Yeah.
What's that feeling like when you're out there by yourself?
Well, I guess that's, to everybody's own experience, right? I think that being by yourself in these places can be kind of intimidating, maybe, to think about what those encounters might look like, or that you're ways out, by yourself. I think they can also be, really thrilling and maybe even spiritual to be out there by yourself and have those opportunities to have those encounters with not just the environment, but organisms. So I guess for me, Frida, I find it really exciting, really fun. I mean, it's really important work. It's really hard work, but it's also, to me, to have those opportunities I think are pretty exciting.
I have a question for you that's maybe a little bit something. What do you perhaps carry with you for defense if there is a situation? Like, in my mind, I didn't really think of it this way, but if you are somehow in a situation, what do you have perhaps to defend yourself if you need to?
Well, I mean, we do certainly take safety precautions. That's something that we really stress into everybody, that, our job is to do work up there, but our job is also to be safe. So, to be honest with you guys, the biggest, concern I have up there really doesn't have to do with interactions with wolves or moose. It's more about getting hurt.
Sure.
Getting, like I said, you're out there 8 a.m. to 5 p.m., cold exposure. And so a lot of our safety precautions really revolve around making sure that there are things for you to keep yourself warm in case something does happen. And so we bring it's a bunch of stuff in our day pack that we bring with us in case an emergency does come up. And that's actually what I'm most concerned with, is making sure that everybody doesn't get hurt on trail, that they don't, as Frida was saying, go down the hugging in too fast and hurt their knee or their ankle and then get stuck out there. But God forbid if that were to happen, that they do have ways that they can, treat themselves and keep themselves warm. We also do carry with us radios that that are for communication with Gilbank, where National Park Service personnel are. So we have someone there on site that kind of can monitor then each of us as we run our transects. And so if something were to come up, there's an opportunity to radio back to the Gilbank facility and say, hey, something's going wrong, whatever that might be. And finally then, in addition to having that opportunity, but also having multiple daily check-ins, we also have everyone running the survey carry what are called inReach devices, and those are basically just kind of emergency beacons that if it really, really does get bad out there, that there's an opportunity for you to be located and for help to be able to find you.
Did you see a wolf or a moose?
No, not this winter. I have not. I did not. What we see a lot of is their signs on these trails. I always like to joke that seeing, especially like wolves on the trail, is rare in the winter. I like to joke because I'm breathing so loud they can hear me a mile away. But I kind of mean it. Sometimes what you see in the tracks can be almost as exciting as seeing some of these critters in person. where you can see interesting almost behaviors emerge, that you might stumble upon a marten track that is doing a lot of tortuous twisting and turning, and it's circling, and then you find a kill site, at one of those circle spots. And that really tells its own story. Or this past year when I was on trail and I followed a wolf track for a good little ways down the trail, and then I saw a fox, track jump right into it, right behind it, and begin to trail that wolf, probably looking for or hoping for some kind of meal, leftover table scraps. So those being out there and seeing some of those tracks can be really kind of exciting, and they tell their own little story.
I love to say that there's no anonymity in winter. It's so fabulous. And frankly, if someone gets lost in winter, when you have an out and back, just follow your tracks out and you should be good.
Right. You can always follow us.
Yeah.
Right? That's right.
So I'm curious also now, Johnathan, before we went on here today, Frida was talking about somebody named Angelique Mott and the story. Can you share what that is? Because I'd never kind of heard this. Give us a little overview.
Yeah. So Angelique Mott was an Ojibwe woman who was married to Charlie Mott, who was a trapper up in Upper Great Lakes area. And back in 1845, they were contracted to sit on a mining claim on Isle Royale. And that is that they were hired to basically kind of stake out a claim for a mining company. And so they were dropped off in the summertime, and they were promised a set of provisions. But the sad story is that many of those provisions didn't come through. So they were woefully undersupplied when they were dropped off by this company on Isle Royale. And they were promised that a ship would be returning very soon. But that ship never came, and they were stuck out there for a winter on Isle Royale. And if you look at a map on the eastern end of Isle Royale today, you'll see Mott Island. And Mott Island is where the Park Service personnel headquarters are. It's a small island just on the south side of Isle Royale, the main island. And if you go across that channel to the mainland of Isle Royale, you'll also see on the map a place called Starvation Point. Now, the story of Angelique and Charlie then is they were dropped off with not enough supplies and told they were going to be picked up very soon, but then they had to spend the winter on Isle Royale without provisions. And it's a sad story. It's a challenging story. Ultimately, Charlie Mott did starve to death and die, and Angelique was left there to try and survive. And she did. She did survive that winter, and she ultimately was rescued. But what's interesting about that is that, how Angelique was trying to make a living out there and how Charlie tried his best but couldn't and ultimately perished. And, a lot of people, myself included, when, we've heard this famous story, it's a classic story of Isle Royale, wondered, why would that be? One might presume that snowshoe hares have been on Isle Royale, forever, for a very, very long time. And that's something that could be maybe trapped and subsisted on. But the problem were the snowshoe hares on Isle Royale that year, that winter, that particular winter, were very scarce. And there were even excerpts from Angelique's interview after she was saved from Isle Royale, where she was lamenting how stressful and hard it was to capture snowshoe hares. She was creating snares from her hair, from locks of her hair, as she knew how to create snares from them. But she just had the darndest time capturing any of these hares. She finally caught one, and she was so hungry at that point that she just ate it raw. She tore its skin off and just ate it because she was starving. Mm-hmm. But then it took a long time for her to catch another one. And through this interview, she laments that. Like, almost perplexed, and frustrated at the lack of being able to trap snowshoe hares, which are typically abundant on Isle Royale. Well, some of our research from Isle Royale really focuses on snowshoe hare dynamics. And one of the things that we found is really interesting ecologically, but actually also helps us understand the story of Angelique and Charlie, and especially why they had so much trouble trapping snowshoe hares. Have you guys heard of the 10-year cycle of snowshoe hares?
No.
You haven't? Okay.
Okay, here he goes. I can
Here
tell.
we go. We're gonna do some ecology here, people. So, snowshoe hares are famous. They're famous for 10-year boom and bust cycles. Many of us learned this in like high school biology or college biology, where we talk about lynx and hares and how every 10 years they peak and then they crash and peak and crash and peak and crash. And this is what we call cyclic dynamics. And this has been something that's been known for, over 100 years now, that species like snowshoe hares go through these very predictable boom and bust cycles, and those frequencies are very predictable as every 10 to 11 years. Now, what really is interesting is we've reconstructed how snowshoe hares on Isle Royale cycle, and they also cycle every 10 years. Boom and bust, boom and bust, boom and bust. And what's really interesting is that they actually cycle in synchrony. They exhibit the exact same cyclic dynamics, boom and bust, the time, and even to a certain degree the magnitude, with the mainland populations, snowshoe hares in Minnesota or Ontario. Now, because of that, what we can actually do is we can reconstruct, was it a boom year or a bust year on Isle Royale in that winter that Angelique and Charlie were forced to overwinter on Isle Royale. And when we do that, we actually realize that they were dropped off at a particularly terrible year to be out there without food. It was a bust year for snowshoe hares. And so just by bad luck, they were dropped off, not just with poor provisions, not just picked up way too late, but also during a year where snowshoe hares were exceedingly rare because of that 10-year cycle. And that helps to explain why Angelique was so frustrated that she couldn't trap snowshoe hares, and may also help to explain why Charlie didn't make it through that winter.
We're talking with Johnathan Pauli here today. He's a professor at the Department of Forest and Wildlife Ecology, University of Wisconsin Madison. The winter survey, the winter study on Isle Royale National Park. It's all a story about survival, Frida, and that's an interesting concept here for a quick moment here.
No kidding. And, there's no better place to study survival than winter on Isle Royale. And now this leads us into, Johnathan, can you share how it also opens up, and maybe to some of our listeners, this is a new term, it was to me, refugia, and what that means when we're studying these islands in the Great Lakes.
Yeah, that's great. Refugia is something near and dear to my heart. Refugia are the idea that, it's kind of a fancy word for a refuge, right? A safe place. And it really comes from thinking about how species persisted, not now, but a long time ago during the last ice age, during the Pleistocene. The idea is that most of North America was covered by ice sheets, and much of the continent then was more or less uninhabitable, miles of ice and snow. And there were these things, however, and they were called nunataks. And nunataks are basically like mountain peaks or high areas that project through the ice sheet. And it's actually a chunk of land then that sits there. Or also pockets beyond where the ice sheet sat, these refugia, these places where species, native species to North America, were able to persist even in the face of these giant ice sheets, even though they were surrounded by ice, that they became almost like, little museums, temporary museums to hold on to these species, these native species in these areas. And as the ice sheets then retreated, those species emigrated out of those little refugia, those little places that weren't completely consumed by the ice sheets. And that's really why we see so much of our current day biodiversity in North America now is because those are the species that were able to persist through those glacial extents. And many of them within these refuges, these refugia that were not completely covered by ice sheets. We can take that concept, though, that historical concept, and we can apply it now and even into the future. And one of the ideas behind refugia now is that we are also now undergoing rapid climate change and a rapid change in the environmental context that we're looking at. Rather than it being ice sheets, now what we're seeing is that winters are warming quickly. And so we're losing a lot of our snow seasons throughout much of the Great Lakes region. That the snow is shallower, the snow is denser, the snow isn't as expansive, the snow doesn't last as long. So we're really changing what the winter environment looks like. And at the same time, we're also changing what the surface of the earth looks like through human development, that we're converting forests or prairies into places where we live. And so we can begin, though, to think about this. Can we create protected areas, refugia, where species are able to persist, places that are buffered from land change and climate change, where they can persist so that eventually when we get our ducks in a row and we're able to tackle climate change, that those species then can persist but also recolonize where they historically were. And so that's really the idea of refugia. And in the Great Lakes region, these islands, Isle Royale, Apostle Islands, they really represent these interesting test beds for the concept of refugia. They're buffered by climate change. They sit in a lake, and that lake then moderates the temperature, the warming temperature from climate change. They sit in a lake, so that lake, through lake effect, actually still generates quite a bit of snow. Although snow depths are declining, they're not declining to the same degree that we see in other parts of the same region. And they're on islands, so they're largely buffered from human development because they're parks, they're protected, and they're buffered from, because they're islands, other things like the invasion of exotic non-native species, which can also alter these communities. So these islands then really create this very interesting place to think about, can we conserve native regional species, especially those that are vulnerable to climate change, and especially those that are going to be vulnerable to changing winter conditions, as a place where they can hold out, that they can hold out and persist because these places are somewhat buffered.
This is an interesting concept. It kind of gives the idea that it has a protected sort of space that allows things in a way to take their natural course, which is probably just incredibly invaluable to have this as a resource.
Absolutely. I think it's not just, I like the way you put that, Walt. It's not just a place that kind of holds on to these species, but it holds on to these ecological interactions and these processes. And it also is a place then that we can study these ecological processes and interactions and understand how they may adapt or change under future climate change. So they are really, really important places, not just for our understanding, but also for the conservation of these critters and these processes.
Johnathan, how can our listeners learn more about your research?
Yeah, so I do have a website through the University of Wisconsin Madison, and that does list a series of the projects that we have going on. Isle Royale, Apostle Islands, these are really important places to me. I'm a Midwesterner, so being able to study in my backyard is really important to me and something that I take great pride in. But I also do work, really all across North America and into South America and Central America as well. And folks can learn about that on my website.
We'll be sure to link that up also here for folks that are checking this out. But it really has been an interesting conversation with you again, Johnathan, today to talk about the winter study, what you're learning, what you can take from that, and also the sort of the extremely unique and special creation of this refuge, as you say, that the islands are. And it's really been great having you on to give us some insight because there's a lot going on there.
Well, I appreciate it. Thanks for having me again, guys.
All right. Thank you. That's Johnathan Pauli. He's a professor at the Department of the Forest and Wildlife Ecology at the University of Wisconsin Madison. And it's true, just talking with him there, Frida, as we wrapped up, said there's a lot going on these islands. People think it's, some rocky outcropping in the lake somewhere. It's wintertime and it's desolate and nothing's happening. But just listening to Johnathan talk about it and what is available to us to keep records and research and study, this is why these kinds of things have to keep going and they have to be supported.
Absolutely. And the idea of being out there, it's such a pristine time of the year. Really, there's not going to be anything in your path. And also how the animals are probably enjoying having the island to themselves too. I remember years ago when we did that documentary at Mackinac Island, and boy, the islanders, once that last boat kind of was taking off and the island was, sort of shrouded in ice and okay, now we've got it to ourselves. I can just imagine that's what the animals are thinking too.
Sure.
But it's so good to have Jonathan's perspective because we kind of think that the moose and the wolves were original, but no, it's the snowshoe hare that, that history there. There were caribou. There were so many lynx, I believe, were also on the island.
Well, we appreciate Johnathan giving us his insight. Like I said, we'll link up the information in through the podcast as well, so you can find out more about Johnathan Pauli, professor, Department of Forest and Wildlife Ecology. Look him up at University of Wisconsin Madison. And as always, it's good to have him here with us. And if there's an idea, maybe you hear something that you'd like to have us look at here on the Lake Superior podcast, find us through the National Parks of Lake Superior Foundation. Get the word to Frida, to me, and we will take a look into it. But that's going to wrap it up with a very interesting conversation about a very interesting place, and of course the winter study at Isle Royale National Park. I'm Walt Lindala.
I'm Frida Waara. Thanks for listening. The National Parks of Lake Superior Foundation, NPLSF, is the only official nonprofit 501c3 fundraising partner of the National Park Service for all 5 U.S. national park sites on Lake Superior.
To learn more about NPLSF projects and programs, you can visit the website at nplsf.org or friend them on Facebook.
I'm Frida Waara.
And I'm Walt Lindala. Thanks for listening to the Lake Superior podcast.
This podcast made possible with the support of the National Parks of Lake Superior Foundation and Media Brew Communications.
This episode brought to you by Cafe Imports, Minneapolis-based importers of fine specialty green coffees. Independently owned and operated since 1993, Cafe Imports has been dedicated to decreasing its impact on the earth through renewable energy, carbon neutrality, and by supporting conservational efforts in places where quality coffee is grown and also where quality coffee is consumed. Where does your coffee come from?
And by the National Parks of Lake Superior Foundation. As a nonprofit, we rely on support from listeners like you. If you like what you hear, please consider a donation. To learn more and make a gift, visit us at www.gosuperior.org.